Why do some spiritual teachings, really stick? They don't just endure, they actually transform lives generation after
while
generation.
others just fizzle out
Uh,
or become really rigid dogma.
exactly. It's a huge question, right? What gives them that staying power? Well, today we're going to dive deep into a pretty fascinating idea. Maybe the answer isn't about the founder or specific prophecies, even.
Uh,
Maybe it's about whether the teachings tap into something deeper, universal structures, patterns, almost like they're baked into reality itself. We'll use the Unification Church and its divine principle as our main case study today.
right.
But, and this is important, the insights we're hoping to unpack, they're much broader than just one group. This is really an invitation for you, listening, to think about patterns in your own life, how you see the world.
That's the core mission here. We want to explore how these key unificationist ideas, spirit, fallen nature, restoration, how they can be seen as, well, universal informational patterns.
Informational pat.
Yeah, the idea being their power to transform isn't tied just to loyalty to one person. We'll be looking at them through lenses like symbolic cosmology, systems theory, even modern psychology.
Okay.
We'll draw on thinkers like Jung,
Yeah.
sure, but also Dawkins, Capra, Pigot, van der Kolk. Quite a mix. And just to be super clear up front, this isn't about proving theology right or wrong.
No.
It's about exploring how looking at symbolic patterns can show us the deep structure behind religious life, behind just human experience.
It's not really empirical spirituality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What actually works? What can you feel? What can you see? Like real changes in behavior, in relationships, not just belief.
Okay, symbolic pattern reasoning. That sounds a bit heavy, maybe. Can you break that down? What does it actually mean? Because I have a feeling it's something we all kind of do anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We do. It's fundamentally about how we find meaning. Mathieu Pigot, who we're drawing on, argues symbols aren't just metaphors.
Not just nice analogies.
No, they're functional. They actually reveal the deep code, the operating system, for how human systems organize themselves over time. They connect our individual lives to these bigger repeating patterns. It's pretty different from, say, scientific reasoning, which focuses on material cause and effect, right?
Right, like A causes B physically.
Yeah. Symbolic reasoning looks for the recurring stories, the hero's journey, for instance.
Or the fall and redemption idea.
Exactly. These aren't just old myths. They're like blueprints that pop up again and again in individual lives, across cultures, even in how institutions behave. They shape how we make sense of everything.
So it's about seeing the structure beneath the surface story. Can you give us a
Mm.
concrete example from the material? How does this actually work?
Sure. Let's take the biblical fall, Adam and Eve.
Okay.
From this symbolic view, it's way more than just a literal event in a garden. It's a structure, a pattern of disobedience, leading to shame, leading to exile or separation.
Hmm.
And once you see that pattern, you start noticing it everywhere in real life.
Like in personal betrayals.
Yes. Or moral compromises, or, as the source notes, even when people feel alienated from a spiritual group they used to belong to. That pattern of rupture, of separation, it just repeats. The details change, but the structure remains, and you can extend that. Think about concepts like being part of a chosen lineage,
Right.
or needing to pay indemnity, making amends for past wrongs. These aren't just abstract theological points. They function as powerful archetypal roles.
They give people a place in the story.
Exactly. A sense of purpose, of significance in this big cosmic drama. It clicks on an emotional, social level.
Okay, here's what really grabs me. The source suggests that what keeps people loyal, sometimes even after they've become disillusioned with parts of a religious system, is often the concurrence of that underlying symbolic pattern, not necessarily literal belief in every detail. What does that say about us? About our need for meaning?
It's as our brains are pattern matching machines. We crave a story that hangs together, that explains the world and where we fit.
We need things to make sense.
We do. But there's a danger. Right, when a symbolic truth gets treated as a rigid, literal fact.
Set in stone.
Yeah, or when a symbolic role becomes so absolute, it leaves no room for individual growth or nuance or reinterpretation. So this approach helps us ask that really vital question. What's the underlying pattern here? And how is it actually shaping us, maybe in good ways, maybe not?
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's pivot to the concept of spirit. Traditionally, that word conjures up images of something mystical, supernatural.
Ethereal, yeah.
How does this pattern framework help us think about something so intangible?
Well, the reframe is to see spirit not as some floaty energy, but as the invisible architecture.
The blueprint.
Kind of. It's the structure that gives energy its form, its direction, its meaning. Think of it like a dynamic pattern of information, rooted in those deep archetypes Jung talked about.
Like software for the soul.
That's a great way to put it. Running on our biological hardware. It encodes how we perceive, how we relate, how we act. Just like software tells a computer what to do, this spirit pattern guides our inner world, our relationships. What's powerful is this view kind of demystifies spirit a bit,
Yeah.
takes away some ambiguity, but it absolutely preserves its power. Its power to shape our whole worldview, generate behaviors, create loyalties. The key is seeing that your worldview, your habits, your connections, they aren't random. They're expressions of these deep organizing patterns.
That's a really different way to think about it. Okay, so if spirit is an underlying pattern, how does this apply to something really challenging, like the idea of Satan and unificationism?
Yeah.
That often feels very real to people.
Right. Instead of seeing Satan as this like external bad guy invading from outside,
Yeah.
we can understand Satan as the personification of pattern distortion.
Ah, so it's a corruption within the system.
Exactly. It's woven into the symbolic structure itself. It represents the selfishness, the chaos, the resentment that bubbles up when that original organizing code gets warped or inverted.
So what people experience as Satan's influence.
Could be understood as internalizing those disordered patterns, what theology calls fallen nature. It's the system itself going wrong from the inside.
Okay, so if our spirit is this personal pattern, this unique blueprint, what happens when we die? Does the pattern just blink out? Is there continuity?
Well, according to the source material we looked at, death is the dissolution of the personal pattern. That specific individual configuration fades.
Okay.
But the deeper archetypal patterns, the ones connected to universal symbols, they might persist in cultural memory, in the collective experience.
So the individual fades, but the underlying archetype endures.
Sort of like that. It's a transition. The personal pattern dissolves, but the archetypes remain part of the, let's say, cosmic or cultural field, still influencing the living.
The Unification Church has this concept, returning resurrection. How does this pattern idea make that more understandable? Less about literal ghosts floating around.
Yeah, instead of thinking about actual disembodied ghosts, think about a persistent pattern continuing through resonance.
Resonance. Like tuning forks.
Kind of. So imagine someone died with deep, unresolved grief. That unresolved pattern might resonate with a living person who's grappling with very similar emotional wounds or structures.
Okay.
And that resonance could actually spur mutual growth. The living person works through those patterns, maybe even, in a sense, completes something the deceased person couldn't resolve. And you can connect this to other ideas, right? Jung's collective unconscious is a big one.
Right. Shared symbols and myths.
Or even Dawkins' concept of memes, how ideas and cultural patterns replicate and spread. And trauma science, like van der Kolk talks about how unhealed wounds in one generation, physically and emotionally, impact the next through behavior, neurology.
It gets passed down.
Absolutely. So the spiritual world becomes less like a ghost realm and more like this interconnected patterned network of influence, memory, and relationship.
Wow. Okay. That grounds it in a way that feels potentially verifiable, almost.
Let's shift now to fallen nature. In unificationism, that's often tied to a misuse of love, introducing corruption. How does the symbolic informational lens change how we see that?
We can frame the fall not just as a bad choice, but as a distortion in the original spirit pattern.
Like static on a radio signal.
Or a mutation in DNA, maybe. Noise corrupting the signal. Peugeot interprets the serpent in Genesis as symbolizing this inversion chaos, messing up the divine order by putting impulsive desire ahead of wisdom.
Okay.
And this created a fundamental misalignment in relationships, something encoded deep in the human condition. And you see echoes of this all over modern psychology.
Like what?
Well, think about Jung's shadow. All the parts of ourselves we reject or deny, they don't disappear. They just go underground and often get projected onto other people, causing conflict.
Right, blaming others for our own stuff. Or René Girard's idea of mimetic rivalry. He argued we often don't even know what we truly want. We just copy the desires of others, which leads to hidden competition, jealousy, misplaced devotion.
Wanting what they have.
Exactly. And then there's van der Kolk's work on trauma. It powerfully shows how wounds literally get passed down through families and communities, shaping perceptions, relationships, even biology, through these ingrained patterns, behavioral, emotional, neurological.
So if we pull all that together, fallen nature isn't just about being morally bad, it's something more systemic.
Precisely. It's not just individual moral failure. It's this whole range of distortions, psychological glitches, social dysfunctions, cognitive biases, unresolved trauma, bad memes we pick up, all perpetuated, often unconsciously, through our systems and relationships.
That changes the focus, doesn't it?
Completely. It shifts from judgment towards healing. The task becomes consciously identifying and realigning that broken code, restoring right relationships within ourselves, with others, and with that underlying divine pattern.
Okay, that's a really constructive way to look at it. So if fallen nature is this distortion, then restoration has to be about fixing it. Unification theology uses the term indemnity for reversing the fall. How do we understand indemnity in this pattern framework?
Right. If fallen nature is a distortion of our core spirit pattern, then restoration is like the conscious reprogramming of that pattern,
Like debugging the code.
or overwriting the dysfunctional code with healthy functional code. Indemnity, in this light, becomes the effort, the price, the often sacrificial work needed to restore what was lost or broken.
What does that involve?
It usually involves things like sincere repentance, acknowledging the distortion, acts of selfless service, sometimes enduring suffering, all aimed squarely at consciously realigning oneself with the original intended pattern, the ideal pattern of creation.
Can you give us a real-world feel for this? What does this reprogramming or indemnity look like in someone's life outside the theological jargon?
Absolutely. Think about therapy, actually. Exposure therapy for phobias or trauma recovery work.
Facing the hard stuff.
Exactly. You consciously re-engage with painful memories or patterns, not to wallow in them, but to transform their power over you, to rewrite their influence. In this view, the Messiah figure isn't just some magical fix-it person. They're seen more as a prototype of the original human design.
A working model.
Yeah, a living example of how the healthy pattern can operate. So indemnity becomes that conscious, often difficult, sustained effort to reconfigure your own spirit code through tangible actions. Acts of love, choosing humility, building right relationships. Like maybe a man inherited a family pattern of shutting down emotionally. His act of indemnity, his reprogramming, might be consciously choosing to be vulnerable and present with his own kids.
Yeah.
That one act can start healing generations of distance. Or a woman raised in codependency actively chooses self-worth, sets healthy boundaries. That's consciously changing her ingrained relational pattern. This is real spiritual labor. It's the work.
This brings up a huge question, one I bet listeners are thinking about. If restoration is about embodying these universal patterns, does the system need a single specific Messiah figure like Reverend Moon? Traditional unificationism really emphasizes his indispensability. How does the pattern lens deal with that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? From a symbolic perspective, archetypes like the mediator, the restorer, the redeemer, they're universal.
Like Campbell's hero with 1,000 faces.
Exactly. They aren't locked into just one person in history. So while Reverend Moon might embody that messianic archetype very powerfully for his followers, others can replicate that pattern because the pattern itself exists within reality, accessible to anyone who aligns with it. The source material frames Reverend Moon as a prototype.
A blueprint again.
A model showing the essential characteristics of that messianic role. A pattern that others can recognize, learn from, and potentially fulfill themselves if they align with it. It places him in a long line of mediators across traditions, like Mircea Eliade might discuss.
So if you follow that logic, it kind of pushes back against the idea that he's uniquely essential, right? If the pattern is repeatable, what's the ultimate goal? Is it still about following him specifically?
Well, the goal shifts. It's less about eternal exclusive veneration of Reverend Moon, the person,
Okay.
and more about continuing and evolving the pattern that he helped to recover or exemplify. It suggests a move away from purely hierarchical authority towards more participatory embodiment, everyone potentially participating in the restoration.
But there's a warning in there, too.
A big one. If Reverend Moon is seen as one embodiment of a universal archetype, then focusing only on venerating him without actually replicating the pattern in your own life, that risks becoming a form of idolatry.
Focusing on the person, not the principle.
Exactly. The true power of the Messiah in this interpretation isn't their uniqueness. It's the repeatability of the pattern by others. It's about empowering everyone else to become their own version of that prototype.
That is a really radical reframing. So if Reverend Moon isn't the only source of authority, then what is? Why should someone value the divine principle if it doesn't demand absolute belief in its author as the exclusive pipeline to truth?
Yeah, this gets right to the heart of the difference between what you might call dogmatic versus empirical spirituality.
Okay, explain that.
In a purely dogmatic model, something is true because the prophet said it or the book says it, full stop.
Authority-based.
Right. But in an empirical model, truth is validated because it works, because it accurately maps onto reality, because it demonstrably heals lives, because it explains things consistently across different situations.
Like a scientific theory.
Very much like that.
Yeah.
It gains traction not just because of who came up with it, but because it consistently predicts outcomes or explains observations when you apply it. So the divine principle, when you reframe it symbolically and connect it to science and psychology, it reveals patterns, structures that resonate deeply with human experience.
Things people can actually see and feel.
Exactly. Its teachings, in this view, function like a powerful theory.
Oh.
You can test them, observe the results in your life and relationships, and find they often work consistently.
And you're saying there are concrete examples of this working, not just abstract ideas.
Absolutely. Think about the principles of fallen nature and restoration we just discussed. They map directly onto observable things.
Like generational trauma in psychology.
Yes. Or epigenetics in biology, how our experiences can literally change how our genes are expressed.
Wow.
Or how cultural patterns get transmitted in sociology. So people practicing these principles can actually see measurable changes, better relationships, emotional healing, a stronger sense of purpose. That validates the teaching itself, separate from just loyalty to the founder.
It stands on its own merits, in a way.
Precisely. And that empirical quality is what, according to this view, saves the divine principle from potential idolatry. It affirms its value as a potentially universal framework, while also opening the door to the idea of multiple messianic figures or manifestations of that pattern.
So, taking this all in, what are the big implications for how people practice faith, for how spiritual communities function, for the future of this whole idea of restoration? What changes with this lens?
Well, several things shift, potentially quite dramatically. Faith becomes less about passive loyalty and more about active participation, about embodying the patterns yourself.
Doing the work.
Doing the work. Communities could become more open, embracing diverse expressions of spirituality, seeing the universal pattern in different forms. Restoration itself becomes more flexible, adaptable, evolving across cultures and times.
And leadership.
Spiritual authority would ideally emerge more from lived truth, from demonstrated transformation leaders as guides who embody the pattern, not as infallible gods demanding obedience.
That requires humility from leaders.
And critically, it requires continuous re-examination. Spiritual patterns aren't meant to be frozen dogma. They need to be renewed, questioned, engaged with, and applied practically in each new generation.
So it's dynamic, not static.
Exactly. This whole reinterpretation aims to bridge things that are often seen as separate. Faith and reason, tradition and modernity, individual growth, and changing the whole system.
So, wrapping up, what we've really dug into today is this powerful idea that true, lasting spiritual power might not come from exclusive figures or rigid rules.
Right. It might lie in these enduring, universal patterns woven into the fabric of reality itself.
Patterns we can actually engage with.
By reframing core concepts like spirit, fallen nature, restoration through these combined lenses, archetypes, information theory, psychology, we see them less as abstract beliefs and more as dynamic, even testable principles for living.
And the Messiah figure, in this view,
Becomes less about being a one-off savior and more like crucial proof. Proof that the pattern of restoration works. Proof of human potential for realignment with the ideal.
hopefully this deep dive offers a path toward a spirituality that feels more robust, more grounded in experience, and genuinely capable of transforming lives and communities from the inside out.
And maybe we can just leave you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on. What patterns may be inherited, maybe learned, maybe societals, are currently playing out in your life, in your key relationships, or in your community? And seeing them through this lens, might you now be ready to consciously re-examine them, maybe even begin the work of reprogramming them?